Today's guest deserves the highest level of respect, as he spent most of his working life serving others. He retired from his service with both law enforcement and the National Guard. Rather than moving forward with a life of relaxation, he decided to challenge himself by taking on security leadership roles in the private sector. Our guest, Steve Bogle, embraces new challenges and new learning opportunities, and that is why he is here today. Steve, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little more about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on this morning. And, you know, I went to high school on the east side of Des Moines here, and my dad always used to tell me he thought I was in a hurry to grow up. When I was 12, I wanted to be 14 to get my learner's permit. When I was 14, I wanted to be 16 to get my driver's license. When I was 16, I wanted to be 18 so I could vote. But along about 12 years old, 13 years old, and remember I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, I really thought I wanted to be a law enforcement officer. And as you can imagine, that's not something that you talked a lot about to your friends back then, because it probably wasn't one of the most popular professions to think you might want to pursue. And so I graduated from high school early. I was 17 years old. And I wanted to get in law enforcement, but nobody hires a 17-year-old, but I could join the Iowa National Guard. And I joined the 186th Military Police Company. Mom and Dad had to go down and sign to to give me the permission to join. And so in 1975, off I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for my basic training. And I was down there for about 4 months and came back in late summer. And then I ended up applying and getting hired by the Des Moines Police Department as a police cadet. And I did that for 3 years until I was 21, which I was in a hurry to turn 21 because that meant I could go to the police academy. And went through the Des Moines Police Academy and had the opportunity to serve there most of the time, about 8 years on the midnight uniform patrol. And in the last couple of years, I worked a nationwide money laundering investigation in concert with the State Division of Criminal Investigation and the Federal Internal Revenue Service. And it was during that time I really realized that my passion in law enforcement was investigations. So I applied and was hired by the State Division of Criminal Investigation. And so that gave me, the opportunity to stay in investigations. And simultaneously, I was still serving in the Iowa National Guard, initially in the military police. And then after I'd been in about 9 years, a lot of my friends, I was a staff sergeant at the time, and they said, if you're going to stay for 20, you really should go to officer school. And so listening to my friends, I did the officer candidate school at the Iowa Military Academy and graduated with my commission as a second lieutenant in June of 1984. So my two careers were kind of moving forward simultaneously, getting opportunities for leadership assignments, staff assignments on my military career, and then really enjoying my investigative career with the State Division of Criminal Investigation. And as time went on, I was fortunate enough to be promoted also in my law enforcement career. Served as a special agent in charge with the DCI, also as the assistant director, and then eventually as the director of DCI, and retired from that position in 2011. And also retired from my military career. I did not stay in the military police function, though. As I graduated from officer candidate school, I got the opportunity to become a helicopter pilot and flew helicopters for 10 years. Hueys and 58s, those are long since in the boneyard now. They got much more modern aircraft, but it was an opportunity that came my way, and it was really enjoyable. Whole family went to flight school in 1985 and really enjoyed that experience. And on my military career, after I was done flying, I had the opportunity to serve on a couple of senior brigade staffs, and I got to command a med battalion. I commanded a logistics brigade, and eventually my wife likes to tell the story that I couldn't hold a job in the military, and they couldn't find any more jobs for me to do, so they promoted me to general officer as a brigadier general. And I retired from that in 2011 also. In 2011, after I retired from both those positions, I worked as the vice president of security for the Iowa Lottery and did that for about 4.5 years. And then the opportunity came up with Mid-American Energy Company here, a great company and a great opportunity because this, I don't think we realize where at least we take it for granted anyway, that, we flip a switch on the wall and we expect the lights to come on. And when it gets cold, we expect the furnace to kick in. And when it gets hot, we expect our air conditioner to kick in. But there's a lot. It's a very complex industry. And probably over the last 15 years, there's been a lot of increasing threats to this industry for a whole host of reasons. And so that's how I ended up here on the phone with you today, Scott.
Wow. One thing occurs to me as you're going through all of that. If someone were to ask you, what do you do in your spare time? It sounds like you probably had a hard time coming up with a good answer for that one.
Well, actually not. I actually, my family is very important to me. And my wife and I we were high school sweethearts. And this year we'll celebrate our 41st anniversary.
Congratulations.
We have 2 great children and 5 grandchildren. So, and I play a little golf, I fish a little bit, I hunt a little bit, and now we chase the 5 grandchildren's activities around a little bit. So I've tried to maintain a balance, and just like anybody, there have been parts of my life where maybe things have gotten out of balance, but I've got a great family that helps remind me once in a while when I'm getting out of balance and helps me get back in.
I respect anybody that, and this is no disrespect to others who were unable to make this happen, but anyone who can stay married for 41 years, that's impressive. It's a very impressive feat. You don't see or hear a lot of that anymore in our society. And for that, I have even a greater level of respect for you now than I even started with.
Well, I'm very fortunate. I found the right person early on in my life, and she's a very patient person.
It was interesting. Just this week, I saw a LinkedIn post, and it was from someone just saying, what is your greatest regret? If you could go back and change anything, what would it be? And at the time, there were 102 comments, and those things intrigued me because I like to see if there's common denominators that come up in those type of posts. And I was able to boil it down into 5, and I'll save the listening group some time. I will not get into all 5, but one of the 5 dealt with relationships, specifically their choice and spouse. And I don't think we spend enough time teaching our kids the importance of taking the right amount of time and finding the right person. And I'm very thankful to hear that you did find that right person.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate, very blessed, that's for sure.
You also mentioned that your dad said you were in a hurry to grow up. But just another side note, I'm looking at your life as you just explained to all of us listening. Are you now trying to slow down life because you've retired many times and you're still working? So what's that all about?
Well, I would say I have slowed down. I mean, when I had two parallel careers, my law enforcement career and my military career, and especially after September 11, 2001. That was a very, very busy time. Busy time doing important work and work that I had a passion for. For the most part, for during that time, you don't even think about it as a job. It's just, it feels like it's the right thing to do, and you feel fortunate that you've been given the opportunity and you've got the right background, training, and experience to be in those positions and set the conditions for success. But having just one job now feels like it's slowing down to me, and I'm sure there'll come a time where I may want to slow down even more and train. I don't see me completely stop working. I could see me maybe someday transitioning to more of a semi-retirement consulting type role. This has been my life's work, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I enjoy the people that are involved in it, and I enjoy the work itself. So I get it. I get enough time to do my hobbies and enjoy the other things I like to do too.
Absolutely. We're just now really getting to know each other. The one thing that really stands out to me, though, is your passion to learn. You just seem to embrace new challenges, embrace new opportunities to learn something new. So has that just been a part of your life from day one?
It has. I mean, I enjoyed school when I was, in school. Like I said, I was in a hurry. It seemed like, and so as I grew older and started to understand, it's not just about taking the next test and doing as good as you could on it, but actually learning and understanding the information and the various concepts. And so as I had the opportunity to later go on to college, and I didn't do the traditional college thing either. I was an adult student prior to a lot of these colleges and universities having adult student programs, and then got to go attend several military schools. Obviously the United States Army War College was kind of the pinnacle of that for me, and it was something that at that time, I was in the distance learning course, so I was on a 2-year program. And that was in 2000 to 2002. So at that time, I started that as 43 years old. Um, it's one of those things where, you just don't think you're going to learn anything else that's going to make you change the way you think. And in fact, it did. It really helped me develop as a strategic leader, a more senior leader, in understanding, how you look at the broad scope of things and all the interdependencies of all the different, um, you know, elements of power, if you will, and how things happen on a global scale. And so it really changed the way I think. And then being able to bring that back, not just applying it from a military sense, but really applying it in a lot of different areas of life, both in my law enforcement career and then just thinking about life in general. And so it really changed the way I think, and it was a great experience. And after that, I had some other opportunities to attend the John F. Kennedy School of Government for 1 and 2 week courses out there. I got to spend some time. There were a dozen United States general officers from Army and Air Force that we had a 1 week meeting with a dozen general officers from Russia, and got to interact with those folks and kind of learn a little more about them, and then to go over to Germany and attend a 2 week national and international security conference. Just all those opportunities that I was able to take advantage of. And you're right. Even today, if I see something that piques my interest, whether it's an article or a conference, I look forward to going to those and learning new things.
This is one of those questions that we already know the answer before I ask it, but there are many listeners on here that are listening because they are lifelong learners. That's why they're listening to this podcast. But do you feel one can be successful as a security manager today if lifelong learning is not a part of their habits?
Well, it would depend on how they want to define success. And I would say if their success is just to get through the next year, then probably. But I think especially if they're younger and this is something they want to make a lifetime profession, then they just need to understand that they're going to continually have to be learning about new threats, how to mitigate those new threats, where those threats may come from, and what's the motivation of the people behind those threats. And then I think if you also have to be willing to continue to learn about people. I mean, I'm a part of the baby boomers generation, and so there's some generalities that people make about that generation. And then, we have the generation after that, and, they've got all kinds of labels, and it's Generation X, millennials, all that. It's about continuing to learn about people. And, we are the most complex organism on this planet. And so and anything that you're going to do in security is going to involve people. So you really need to be kind of a student of human behavior and, continually learn about people.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So 20 years ago, if you were coming into this industry, your biggest threat was, issues such as robbery, shrink control. It had to all deal with what I'll call physical components, physical security of typically a brick and mortar type facility. But one thing we're really seeing change in our world is not the human nature. There are still people with impure motives, but the methods are definitely changing. And so there's this conversion going on right now of physical security and what is now the popular cybersecurity. As a manager, how are you embracing the conversion of these changes?
Well, I'm learning as much as I can about that, and um, I really am a big proponent of not creating silos when it comes to security. I don't believe we should silo off cybersecurity and have only a certain group of people dealing with cybersecurity. I mean, listeners, I'm sure have heard this from their security managers, is that cybersecurity is everybody's business, just like physical security is. I mean, whether you're talking about, um, I remember being a young police officer in the wanting neighborhood watch programs and setting those up because the police couldn't be everywhere, and so the police department would have campaigns where they would send out, hey, if you see something, call this number. And then eventually, in law enforcement across this nation, we got to where no matter where you're at, you can call 911 if you see a crime in progress or something going on. Well, it's really no different in cyber. I mean, you continue to hear cybersecurity professionals talk about, where's the biggest gap or hole in our defenses, and it's that thing that sits between the chair and the keyboard. It's the human being and how susceptible we can be. And so we have to educate folks on the various tactics and techniques from a cyber perspective that people, the phishing techniques, going to websites that you shouldn't be going to, those kind of things. They have to become knowledgeable and recognize those things so that they can then report that to, their within their organization, or if it's on their home computers, that they report it, to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, all those kind of things. So it's a new threat in some ways, but they're still trying to do some of the same types of things. And so we have an obligation to educate our employees, educate our citizens on this new threat, and that the types of tactics, techniques, and procedures that the threat will try to use, and then what they need to know to avoid becoming a victim.
What do you say to the security manager who might just give you the feedback that this has to deal with our IT department? This is our technology team. This has nothing to do with me.
Well, I would say they're a little bit out of touch. Just because of what I just talked about, is that one of the biggest vulnerabilities are the people that are using our information technology systems. So it's not an IT issue. In fact, it's a societal issue. And if you're in a company and you're involved in security, it's an issue for all of the business. And if you're in government, it's an issue for all of government. Because our CEO made a great statement here this past year. He said, all of these technological advances they've done two things. They've made us much more efficient in how we deliver our services and our products, but it's created new vulnerabilities. And so as we address these vulnerabilities, it's going to inconvenience you in doing your job. But the benefit that we gain from these additional effectiveness from these technological advances is worth the inconvenience. So just plan on being inconvenienced. And I thought that's a great way to tell people, to look, we understand it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient that when if you've got certain things in place that you can't get to websites you want to get to. It's inconvenient if you have to do certain things, to make sure that you're not becoming a victim of some kind of phishing attempt or something like that. Yes, it's all inconvenient, but it's protecting you, it's protecting your organization. So you have to, if you're going to be in security management today, you have to understand this new threat, and you have to understand what are the things that we can do to mitigate that. And part of that is educating the workforce, educating our citizens.
From a management standpoint and a personal standpoint, cybersecurity I won't call it new, but it's newer to us. And I would say it's always changing. It feels like the moment we feel like we understand what's going on, they come up with something else. How do you deal with that?
Um,
Is it a frustration, or is there a level of excitement that comes with that because there is a change and there is always something to be learning?
yeah, it's obviously the most dynamic environment of all the threat environments that we have. I mean, many of the physical threats have been around for a long time, centuries for some of them. So yeah, it's a really a new area. It is constantly changing, and I'm not sure that we as a society even understand that all the different things that we're going to need to do to move from the reactive state that we find ourselves in many times, where we're reacting to uh, the latest threat, the latest means of delivering that, those threats and things like that, to where we become a little more proactive. And I think a part of that will be, much as it has been in other types in the physical arena, is that we're going to need to continue to understand who the adversary is, the people behind there, what their motivations are for taking on this improper behavior. And so I think then we will start to understand, if we start to understand their motivations, then we can understand, okay, well, if this is their motivation, this is probably the area that they'll be looking to attack us in, or to disrupt us in. And so that's where we put more of our resources in defending and protecting our systems.
Earlier, I mentioned a LinkedIn post, and I told you how I was able to boil it down to the top 5 things. Are you able to potentially boil cyber threats or maybe motives down to 3 to 5 things that you see? What do you see the common motivations to be?
Well, that part really hasn't changed a lot, I don't think. I mean, you have, just your hacktivist, somebody that wants to do this because, hey, I've learned this new skill, and I want to see if I can, it's a challenge to them. You've got your criminal element out there that most likely is looking for financial gain. So the things that they can do to, we've heard a lot about ransomware lately. So, holding people's systems, hostage, if you will, until they pay up. And then you have all the way up to, international terrorist organizations or adversarial nation states that are attempting to influence the global security situation, and so they may target certain, infrastructure within another nation that they want to influence the way that nation is going to um, react to the global security environment.
And I know 9/11, as you already mentioned, drastically changed your role as it stands today in the threat against infrastructure. So, not only the physical, I'm sure the cyber on your end is very critically important to your organization. Now, I don't want to get into the details of your organization, but I know due to its importance, there has to be a level of integration between the physical security side of things. And when I refer to physical security, I'm referring to the historical security manager that's dealt with physical guards, CCTV, alarming, all of that stuff in that pile. And then we have the IT side of it, or the cybersecurity space. And typically, we're thinking of the IT professionals. Can you give us a few best practices, though, on how you have successfully worked together, the two different groups, instead of trying to draw lines, saying, this is a threat. It requires all teams working together. We can't be siloed, as you've already said. What is some practices you can give other security managers that you have found to be very successful?
Well, for me, I found engagement. One of the things that as our company did a minor reorganization, is now I am actually in the IT division in answer to the Vice President of Information Technology. I think this is a great spot for me and my team to be. We are here, we're a part of that organization. We bring in, the security mindset, if you will, as well as disaster response and business continuity. And so we work together then with the people that have the IT background and bring those kind of planning and threat based perspective to the folks in IT. So I think that's huge. Is that we are on one team, and so we are able to I walk out my door, on my office door, and I'm surrounded by people that are going to be a part of our IT security team, our cybersecurity team. And so that's huge. I think is first of all is just engagement, and in continuing to I don't need to be the guy on the keyboard doing the programming or administering the database. In fact, that would probably be a bad thing. But I need to understand what it is they do and where it might create vulnerabilities for us, so that then we can suggest. I might not know exactly what we need to put in place there, but I know we need to put something in place, and that we have that conversation. And so I think that's the biggest part is you need to be engaged. And if your organization can reorganize that, kind of puts that together and knocks down those walls, those silos that we talked about earlier, so that communication just becomes a part of your daily work. I think that is probably the biggest issue. The hardest thing any organization does is communicate. And you have to work at it each and every day. So any barriers that an organization can break down, if you're a security manager, I would embrace working together with the IT team, and anything that you can do to work together with that team is going to make you much more effective.
There's been a lot of media attention recently given to the Internet of Things and the vulnerabilities that these devices can actually add to a organization's network, specifically IP cameras. How are you working within the appropriate divisions of your organization to ensure that you have the system protection that you need, yet you're keeping your network secure as they need to be?
Sure. That, first of all, especially as you get to a larger organization, first of all, some simple things. You need to have a complete inventory that you understand what all is hanging out there on your network. I mean, as simple as that sounds, there are a lot of organizations that they just continue to hang things out there, and they don't think about as they hang an IP camera, let's say, as you say, and then they need to be thinking about, okay, when I hang this IP camera out there, what additional vulnerabilities? I mean, we know what its functionality is, what it's going to do for us, so we understand why we want to place that camera where we place it. But now we got to understand, okay, if we put it on the network, what can access it? What can we do to mitigate, people that shouldn't have access to it? Whether there's a lot of specific things you can do, but you just need to go through that thought process. And if you go through that thought process about, not just, okay, we need a camera here because we want to watch this area because we've had a lot of thefts here, and you hang it out there and you just forget about it. Well, no, now you need to go through the additional thought process. We hang it out here, it's IP based. What else can get to the camera? And then from the camera, what else could they get to if they get into the camera? And understanding all of that, and then where are the places that you can put things in place to mitigate those people coming in. And if you wanted to think of it in a physical realm, I mean, the analogy is basically, you've got something out there, you put a fence around it, but how else can, other than they can cut the lock on the fence, they can dig under the fence, they can climb the fence. Well, now you just have to, and if you don't understand, the IT world, get one of your IT folks to sit down with you and say, okay, here's the analogy. I put a fence around it, but I know people can still climb it. They can cut the lock. They can dig under it. Now, tell me, I've got this fence out here, this virtual fence or this logical fence out here. What are the ways that people can get around that? And what can we do? What can we put in place to stop that or prevent that?
I love what you said about just keeping an inventory list. And you're right, it does seem so simple, but I know that many do not have an accurate list. Second to that is I'm going to add for you is just the password protection. Too often, we're still leaving defaults on these devices, on these networks. And if we didn't leave it at default and we actually managed that password and changed that password, I find that often we are not managing the inventory of those passwords, if that makes sense, knowing
No,
what passwords are
absolutely.
used. And so that's the other advice I would give any listener is find a good way to manage the passwords that are actually being utilized for these devices on the network.
And a really very simple way is password safe, and then make sure that you have good governance on who has access to the password safes. A part of this, no matter how much technology we integrate into our businesses and into our personal lives, there's still a human component to that. And when you talk about your business, you need to have good governance, good policy and procedure on, and it needs to be documented. That absolutely needs to be documented. I mean, I have seen a lot of organizations operate on tribal knowledge, and that works good. That can work good for a decade or sometimes 2 decades. If you have people that have been in your organization a long, long time, but eventually they leave, and when they leave, if unless you want a serious degradation in your performance, you really need to have your policies, procedures, your governance all documented, so that people can come in and understand how you do business and why you do business the way you do.
You mentioned the human element, and we just spoke about the device element, way of securing them up a little better. The reality, though, is there is always a human development. Often we call those employees. And you had already talked about phishing earlier. I know that is a big topic within the organization I work in. Um, what are the, again, top 2 or 3 highest priority things that all employees need to be aware of so that they're not responsible for opening up the network to threats?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, simple things. Email management is, an email awareness. I mean, if you get an email from somebody that you weren't expecting, pick up the phone. Most people, if it's somebody, especially somebody you haven't dealt with on a regular basis, pick up the phone and call them and see if they sent something to you. There's ways, even if it is somebody that you're familiar with, and a lot of the phishing people, that the bad guys that are using phishing techniques, they are trying to spoof email addresses or make them look similar to what you would expect to see. So you can hover over the links that are on there, and a lot of times it's not going to look like what you would expect. So that's a couple of things. Is always be wary of email, especially if it's something that you weren't expecting. And then on your personal life, people get emails all the time. If it sounds too good to be true, I mean, there's probably an old axiom that's really hitting home with this, is it is too good to be true. And just being careful on their email, and then going to website, clicking to go to websites. I mean, it can happen so fast, and so just being overly cautious, I think, or what people would consider to be overly cautious, which actually is not, because it just takes one click. And, if you don't have certain safeguards in place on your networks, one click and your entire network can be impacted.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really jumps out to me on that is we're moving to a society where we avoid phone conversations or real conversations. We like to utilize our email, we like to utilize texting, and we don't want to offend people. We resist conflict. And what I'm hearing you say is just be cautious and pick up a phone sometimes and just verify the information before you make a bad click.
Absolutely, absolutely. That 60, 90 seconds it's going to take you to pick up the phone could help you avoid hours and days and weeks of trying to rebuild your system. making sure that you don't give out your personal information. I mean, if anybody has been the victim of identity theft, they will know what we're talking about here. It's no fun.
Well, Steve, we're nearing the end of time. We've talked about a lot of different items regarding cybersecurity. Is there anything that you feel we've missed that just needs to be put out there as this is the last thing I want you to know, this is highly important?
Well, I don't think one thing we probably haven't talked about, and this has to do it's with anybody that's going to be in a leadership position, not just security managers, but it really does impact, and that is if you've had the opportunity to serve as a leader, make sure you build a great team. And I've always told people, the overwhelming majority of my success has occurred because of the team that I'm on. Nobody gets through this life by themselves, and the same thing can be said about the security profession. Is you don't accomplish things working by yourself. And I've never been afraid. I don't have much of an ego, so I've never been afraid to tell people, look, one of the things I try to do is get people on my team that are much smarter than me. I said, and then I try to set the conditions for success. Let them know what their left and right boundaries are. Tell them what it is we want to accomplish and when we want that accomplished, and then empower them to move forward and get it done. Typically, you'll find they'll get it done better than you could have done it. They'll probably have it on time. And you know what? Even if they make a mistake, they're going to come back and they'll learn from that. And so a lot of it is creating the right leadership climate and making sure that you're setting the conditions for success for the people on your team. You do that, and it's amazing what can happen.
That's an amazing summary and could probably be a podcast of its own. And but I know that you would not be where you're at today, accomplishing all that you're accomplishing today, if you did not follow what you just said. And 3 great points and fairly simple to follow. The final thing I want to ask you, Steve, is if I'm a security manager and I'm trying to grow myself in the area of cybersecurity, I know it's critical, I know it's important. I've been a little hesitant because it's outside of my comfort zone. But after this podcast, I'm making a decision to move forward in my education. Do you have a resource or two that you could provide us that might be a good place to go to learn more?
Well, I think if you go to the SANS website, I think there's a lot of information out there that can, and some of it's very complicated and very advanced, but they also address the, at the beginning level, if you will. I spend a little time on their website quite frequently, continuing to learn. But then, from a networking standpoint, if you're a security manager for a private corporation or even in a government corporation, one of the organizations that I have found to be very beneficial to belong to, the FBI has an InfraGard program, and they have various chapters throughout the United States. And the InfraGard chapter that I belong to here in Central Iowa, has a monthly meeting. We always have a program, and you get the opportunity to interact both with other security professionals as well as the FBI. And as you know, they are one of the lead federal law enforcement agencies that's addressing cybersecurity, and we have a great relationship with them. And that's an organization that if you really want to get involved and learn more, it'll create a great network for you, and you can get a lot of mentoring, peer mentoring from others. So those are probably the 2 that I would recommend.
And I'll add one more just because many of us are familiar with the organization, and that is the McAfee Institute. And they offer a lot of online education in the cyberspace as well as other various topics. Steve, for now, we have met our timeline, and we have reached the end of this podcast. I want to thank you for your time and your insights. I know I learned a lot on this particular conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. So again, I just want to say thank you for your time today.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.